It happened on a quiet Sunday afternoon, in a small kitchen filled with the smell of warm bread and the faint hum of a radio playing a distant hymn. The boy sat by the table, legs dangling, eyes wide open, eyes that carried something ancient. His mother sliced the bread slowly, her hands trembling just enough for the knife to whisper against the crust. And then he said it, softly, clearly, without hesitation. "I've eaten this bread before. When he broke it?" The words hung in the air like smoke. His mother froze. His father, washing the dishes, turned his head but didn't speak. The boy's gaze was far away, not the gaze of a child remembering a dream, but of someone remembering a moment, a sacred one. He spoke again, as if following a thread invisible to everyone else. It was warm, and there was a light on his hands. Everyone was quiet, and when he looked at me, I wasn't afraid. The knife slipped from the mother's hand and hit the counter with a dull sound. The air changed, a kind of silence that doesn't come from absence, but from presence. The father's lips moved in disbelief, but no sound left his mouth. Outside, the wind stirred the laundry on the line. Inside, time seemed to pause. And for a heartbeat, it was as if the kitchen itself remembered. As if those walls had seen it once before. A table, bread broken, and eyes filled with eternal memory. Was it imagination? A dream? Or something that returns only to hearts that once stood close to the divine? If you had been there, watching that small boy speak with such calm certainty, would you have believed him? Or would reason have drowned out the quiet tremor of the holy? The mother couldn't breathe, the father couldn't move. The child simply smiled, breaking a small piece of the bread again, holding it gently in his palm. "It's the same," he whispered. "Only now. We forget faster." And, as the world outside carried on, something eternal brushed against the ordinary, and left a mark. Stay with this moment. Sometimes the mystery speaks louder than reason. Before that afternoon, nothing about their lives suggested the divine might pass through their door. They lived in a modest house on the outskirts of a small coastal town, the kind of place where wind carried the smell of salt and the sound of church bells on Sunday mornings. The father, Daniel, worked repairing boats. His hands were rough, marked by years of holding ropes and tools. The mother, Claire, taught children at the parish school, gentle, devout, careful with her words. Their only son, Eli, was quiet but observant, the kind of child who listened more than he spoke. He would often sit near the window, staring at the horizon. "The sea looks older than everything," he once said, tracing invisible lines in the air as though he could see beyond it. Claire smiled then, thinking it was just another poetic phrase from a child's imagination. But Daniel felt something odd in his chest, a strange unease he couldn't name. Faith, for them, was routine. Grace before meals, Sunday service, candles lit when someone was ill. Nothing extraordinary. Yet lately, Claire noticed that whenever Eli prayed, the house grew quiet. Unnaturally so, like every sound outside paused to listen. One evening, she found him in his room holding a small piece of bread from supper. He wasn't eating it. He was staring at it as if trying to remember something lost. "Mom," he asked softly, "why does it shine before I sleep?" She didn't understand. "What shines, darling?" "The bread, before I close my eyes. I see hands breaking it. The light comes from them. I can almost taste it again." She brushed his hair, trying to dismiss the chill running down her spine. "Maybe it's just a dream," she whispered. But Eli shook his head. "Dreams fade. This one doesn't." From that night on, strange calmness filled their home. Neighbors said they felt peace when they passed by the window where Eli usually sat. The priest from their parish mentioned that the boy's eyes seemed to carry something old. Life went on, but nothing felt ordinary anymore. Birds landed near their door without fear. The family dog, once restless, now slept at Eli's feet for hours, unmoving. And each time he prayed, the air thickened, like time slowed to listen. Claire began to avoid looking too long at her son, not out of fear, but because she sensed something she wasn't ready to name. You've probably met a child who seemed different, not louder, not brighter, but deeper, the kind of presence that makes even silence lean closer. Have you ever seen one like that? One who doesn't need to speak for the atmosphere to change around them? Maybe holiness doesn't arrive in miracles or thunder. Maybe it hides in small kitchens, in the breath between a mother's heartbeat and her child's whisper. The family lived simply, unaware that their table would soon echo one that once stood under a desert sky, a table where bread was broken and eternity leaned close enough to touch. The week after the kitchen confession, words began to arrive to Eli as if carried by tides no map could mark. They were not the kind of words children memorize in classrooms. They were fragments, tastes, textures, memories shaped like touch. He would pause mid-step as if hearing a bell no one else could hear, and then speak softly, almost apologizing to the air for remembering. "There was dust on our sandals," he murmured once, staring at the doormat. We were all sitting, but not in a line. We sat the way hungry people sit, Close, careful, listening. Claire turned from the kettle, her breath caught between fear and tenderness. Daniel looked up from his toolbox, pretending not to be listening, even as the wrench stilled in his hand. "Whose sandals, Eli?" Claire asked, voice steady, soul trembling. He blinked, and the present returned like light through a thin curtain. "Everyone's," he said. "Even mine." Then, a beat later, "Even his." They did not correct him. They could not. Because in the moments when he spoke like that, the room felt ancient and newly born at the same time, as if all their clocks were trying to remember how to be sundials again. At the parish school, during a reading circle, Eli traced the rim of his paper cup with a finger. The other children whispered and fidgeted, but Eli watched the water tremble inside, as if a wind had passed over it. "He gave thanks," Eli whispered. "Not to the teacher, not to anyone in particular," and something in the air changed shape. "What changed shape, dear?" the teacher asked with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "Hunger," Eli said. When Claire came to pick him up, the teacher hesitated before speaking. "Sometimes he says things, poetic things," she said, as though poetry required a permission slip. Claire nodded, thanked her, and walked her son home through the late light that makes everything honest. That night, Eli woke with tears on his face and crumbs on his palm. He had fallen asleep after supper with a last piece of bread in his hand, a habit that made Claire half anxious, half in awe. She found him by the window, moonlight resting on his shoulder like a shawl. "Why are you crying, love?" He tried to smile. "Because I remembered the sound," he said. "When he broke it, it was the sound of mercy. It's small, but you hear it with your chest." Daniel stood in the doorway, held there by a force he couldn't name. He wanted to say something sensible, something that would anchor the moment to the floor, but the words would not obey him. He was a man of knots and ropes and measured lengths. This thing had no knots, no rope, no measure. Eli's phrases continued, uninvited, unashamed, unafraid. The hill smelled like warm stone. His shadow fell on the bread, and it looked like a shelter. "We didn't worry about tomorrow for an hour. Do you know what that feels like?" When we finished, there was still more. The hands that passed it never ran out of giving. Claire began writing them down on scraps of paper she tucked into a small tin beside the stove, not to prove anything, not to show anyone, just to keep them, like you keep seashells that still sound like a shore. In the market, an elderly woman bumped into Eli and dropped her bag. Apples rolled like small, startled hearts across the tiles. Eli knelt without thinking, gathering the fruit with quiet urgency. As he handed the last one back, he said, almost cheerfully, "There were so many of us." And then, catching himself, "I mean, there were a lot of people, and nobody pushed." The woman laughed kindly. "Wouldn't that be a miracle?" she said. "A crowd that doesn't push?" Eli smiled, and for a moment her eyes filled with tears she couldn't explain. Daniel started to wake before dawn, uneasy. He would stand by the sink and watch the first gray fold open over the sea. He thought of nets and measurements, of what could be counted, kept, weighed. He thought of bread that refuses to be less after it is shared. He did not know how to live with that arithmetic. At church, Father Gabriel noticed Eli kneeling longer than the other children. The boy's face turned slightly upward as if listening for a name being spoken from very far away. After Mass, the priest greeted the family at the door. "He prays as though he remembers," Father Gabriel said carefully. Claire's smile was polite. Her eyes were rivers holding back a season. At home, the questions multiplied, but not the answers. And maybe that is how faith grows, by learning to breathe where answers thin out. Each evening, the three of them sat at the table like travelers at a way station. Sometimes they spoke of ordinary things, repairs, homework, the stray cat that had decided their porch was home. And sometimes the ordinary broke open, and through it came a soft procession of words that felt older than language. "He looked at us like we were already full," Eli said one night, "and then he fed us anyway." Do you feel the tug of that sentence on your own hunger? If it were your child, would your heart believe, or would it run from what it cannot measure? Another afternoon, rain struck the windows in long, silver cords. Claire folded laundry in the living room, while Eli sat cross-legged on the floor, arranging crusts into a circle. Daniel pretended to fix a cabinet hinge that didn't need fixing. He kept saying, "Give them something to eat," Eli said. It sounded like a simple thing, like breathing. "Who said that?" Daniel asked, too quickly, as though speed could protect him. Eli tilted his head, listening to something that was no longer the rain. "The one who breaks and is never broken," he answered. When he looked at the bread, it remembered what it was made for. Claire's hand stilled over a towel. The room hummed with an invisible choir. Daniel closed the cabinet door softly, as if sound might shatter the fragile vessel of the moment. Are there truths that our bones recognize before our minds agree? Is there a memory of heaven stored somewhere in the body's small languages? taste, touch, the tremor behind the ribs. By now, Claire's tin by the stove was full of slips of paper. She read them at night when the house was sleeping. Sometimes she wept, sometimes she laughed, sometimes she pressed the notes to her lips as if they were relics from an altar she could not name. Not one of Eli's memories contradicted Scripture. None tried to announce something new. They were echoes, not inventions. Yes, echoes the way a canyon repeats a voice until the voice becomes landscape. And yet, the echoes were close, intimate, like a whisper, speaking into the hollows of the ordinary. In the neighborhood, dogs went quiet when Eli passed. Babies stilled. People found themselves smiling without knowing why. There was no spectacle, no performance. Only a small boy who occasionally paused in the middle of tying his shoe to say something like, "There were baskets afterward, and the baskets were like small boats that came back full." And then he tied the knot, and the day resumed, and the bread in their house tasted, somehow, more like bread. If your child said such things, would you hush him for the sake of peace? Or would you sit nearer, hands open, ready to be fed by what you cannot explain? Days melted into one another, and the small house by the coast began to breathe differently, slower, deeper, as if it had become aware of its own pulse. Eli no longer spoke of dreams. He simply remembered, and his remembering carried weight. People felt it before they understood it. Aunts came to visit and left with eyes wet, saying the air around the boy made them feel like children again, like something inside them had been forgiven without words. Daniel tried to keep life practical. He mended nets, painted doors, and argued with the cost of everything. But every time Eli entered the room, conversation slowed. The father, who had always believed in work more than in wonders, began to lose the line between both. He would watch his son eat, his small fingers breaking bread with that same gentle rhythm, the rhythm that had begun to haunt him. It wasn't dramatic, no halos, no lights, just the unbearable tenderness of repetition, the act of breaking, sharing, handing, receiving. Claire began to write in her journal again. She had stopped years ago when the world felt too ordinary to deserve a record. Now, each page trembled with awe and fear. "I feel that God is hiding in my own child," she wrote one night. "And that terrifies me." The parish and the stirring word spread, quietly at first. A teacher told a friend. The friend whispered it during confession. And soon the parish murmured with gentle gossip about the boy who remembered something holy. Some came only to glimpse him at Mass. The small head bowed, the hands joined in stillness so complete it made the candles flicker. Father Gabriel tried to protect him from attention, but even he was drawn into the current. The priest found himself standing longer at the altar after communion, staring at the bread and wine with new trembling. He visited the family one evening, sitting by their kitchen table, the same table where it had begun. The smell of the sea lingered through the window. "Eli," the priest said softly, "what do you remember when you see the bread?" Eli looked up. His eyes did not search. They recognized that he never ate first. The priest's throat tightened. "And why do you think that matters?" The boy smiled faintly. "Because love is hungry for the other first." Father Gabriel bowed his head. The silence after those words felt like a benediction that neither needed nor sought approval. When he left, he walked barefoot along the road, the sand cold under his feet, whispering prayers he didn't know he still knew. The father's conflict. Daniel was the last to surrender. Faith, for him, had always been a quiet obligation, not a living thing. But each day he felt the ground shifting under his logic. He would find small signs that mocked explanation, like the time he cut his finger repairing a net and Eli pressed his tiny hand over it. The bleeding stopped before Daniel reached for a cloth. "Coincidence," he muttered. Yet the memory burned. That night, he dreamed of waves that looked like loaves, thousands of them, rising and falling under a silver sky. In the middle stood his son, waist deep in light, holding a piece of bread that shone like a heartbeat. When Daniel woke, his hand smelled faintly of flour. He didn't tell anyone. He simply began to pray again, quietly, clumsily, like a man relearning a forgotten language. The community begins to notice soon. Others began to feel it too. An old widow said that when the boy passed her gate, her pain, constant for years, eased for a day. A fisherman swore the storm that should have broken his boat simply turned away the night Eli prayed for him. None of them dared call it miracle. They just said, "There's something about that child." One Sunday, the family arrived late to church. The congregation turned to watch them enter, and for a brief instant, every cough, whisper, and shifting of feet stopped. The organist froze mid-note. Eli walked between the pews, unaware, and sat down. The hymn resumed, but slower, as if time itself had to catch its breath. After Mass, Claire tried to apologize for the attention, but Father Gabriel only shook his head. "Let it be," he said. "Sometimes light refuses to hide." Shadows of doubt. Where wonder blooms, suspicion soon follows. A few neighbors began to murmur darker things, that maybe the boy was strange, that maybe something not from God was speaking through him. Daniel heard them at the docks, whispers carried by salt and jealousy. That night he sat by Eli's bed and asked the question no parent ever wants to need answered. Son, when you speak of those things, do you hear a voice? Eli turned, blinking sleepily. Yes, he said simply. Daniel's heart froze. What kind of voice? The boy thought for a long moment. The kind that waits until I'm quiet enough to listen. He fell asleep after that. Daniel stayed awake until dawn, staring at the ceiling, feeling both terrified and called. The bread that wouldn't mold. One morning, Claire noticed that the leftover bread from the night before, the same loaf Eli had blessed with a silent prayer, hadn't hardened or spoiled. Days passed, and still it remained soft. She hid it away, unsure if she should mention it. Eventually, she brought it to Father Gabriel. The priest didn't touch it, he simply looked. Do not fear what sanctity leaves behind, he said, placing it gently back in her hands. She returned home trembling. That night she dreamed of hands, countless hands, reaching out, each receiving a piece of that same bread, light passing from palm to palm until the world itself glowed. The silence between words. Eli began to speak less, not because the memories were gone, but because silence itself had become his teacher. He would sit by the sea, staring at the horizon, breathing as if the waves were prayers. Claire sat beside him once and asked, "What are you thinking of?" He smiled without looking away. "That I am not remembering. I am being remembered." She didn't understand, but she didn't need to. The truth hung between them, vast and untranslatable. The unseen visitor. One evening, during a storm that washed the world in silver, a man knocked at their door. He was old, soaked to the bone, holding a cane polished by years of walking. Daniel opened, hesitant, but the man's eyes, clear and kind, disarmed him. "I heard there's a boy here who remembers," the stranger said. "May I see him?" They let him in. He sat across from Eli, who studied him silently. "Do you know me?" the man asked. Eli tilted his head. "Not yet, but I will." The man smiled, tears glinting in the candlelight. "When I was a child," he said, "I also remembered things no one believed. You're not alone." Before he left, he placed a small wooden cross on the table. "Keep it," he said. "You'll know when to use it." They never saw him again. The next morning, the sand outside bore no footprints. The dream of multiplication. Weeks later, Eli woke before dawn, trembling. He ran to his parents' room, clutching his chest. "It's happening again," he whispered. "I saw him breaking it. And this time, I saw all of us." "What do you mean?" Claire asked, sitting up. "The faces," Eli said. "They keep changing. Sometimes I see you, sometimes the people from church. Sometimes I see no one, and yet everyone is there." He looked at his hands. When he breaks the bread, time breaks with it. Daniel felt the words settle into him like nails through wood. He reached for his son's hand, found it warm, too warm, and trembling with something alive. Questions without end. The house had become a chapel without walls. People came, pretending to drop off gifts or to ask for small favors, but what they wanted was presence. They wanted to stand near the boy and feel that strange peace. And Claire, now both mother and witness, began to wonder what God asks of those who live beside a miracle. To protect it, to explain it, to endure it. At night, she would whisper into the dark, "If this is your voice, teach me how to stay near without burning." The echo of heaven. One afternoon, as sunlight broke through the clouds, Eli stood by the window and said quietly, "It's almost finished." "Finished?" Claire asked. "What is?" He smiled sadly. "The remembering. He only lets us remember for a while. Then he takes it back, so we can learn to believe again." He reached for the small wooden cross left by the old man and placed it beside the remaining piece of the bread that had never spoiled. The air thickened. Even the ticking clock seemed to hold its breath. "He's near," Eli whispered. "And he's always hungry. Not for food, but for hearts that still break like his." The room filled with stillness so heavy it seemed to hum. Reflection. How many times does the divine walk through our days wearing the face of our own child and we fail to bow? How many small tables carry eternity's echo while we pass the salt and speak of weather? Perhaps the miracle was never that bread multiplied, but that it never ended, that every act of love, every remembering continues the feast. Would you recognize the sacred if it sat at your table? Would you break the bread differently if you believed it once fed the world? Eli's eyes closed slowly, his lips moving in a prayer too quiet to hear. Outside, the waves pressed against the shore like hands against a window, and somewhere between sound and silence, heaven leaned down again, not to perform, but simply to remember. Father Gabriel did not arrive with answers. He arrived with a thermos of tea and the patience of an old oak. He asked permission to enter the house as though the threshold were a sanctuary he dared not profane. Claire set 3 cups on the table, and Daniel, who preferred tools to talk, hovered near the window as if watching for weather. Eli sat quietly, feet not reaching the floor, hands folded with the kind of stillness that is learned only in the company of presence. The priest did not interrogate. He noticed the wooden cross on the shelf, the tin of slips beside the stove, the small crust of bread wrapped in linen. He noticed above all the air, attentive, almost liturgical, as if the room itself had learned to bow. "Eli," he said at last, voice low as tide. "May I sit near you while you remember?" The boy nodded. Father Gabriel took a breath and rested his palms on his knees, empty hands, as if to prove he had not come to seize anything. Silence opened like a door. Minutes let go of their clocks. The priest prayed, not with words, but with availability. Eli spoke first. He never hurried, the boy said. Even when people were hungry, he moved like someone who already knew there would be enough. Father Gabriel's eyes filled but did not spill. "Tell me what enough felt like," he whispered. "Like the world stopped asking to be more," Eli answered. "Like even the wind sat down to eat." Daniel turned away then, under the weight of a goodness he had not asked for. Claire leaned forward, elbows on the table, mother and pilgrim in the same body. "Do you fear these memories?" the priest asked. Eli considered. "Sometimes they make me ache," he said, "but it's the ache of growing, not breaking." Father Gabriel exhaled a gratitude that sounded almost like relief. He had met spectacle before, loud, demanding wonders that fed on attention. This was different. This was the quiet extravagance of God. He asked to pray with them, no theatrics, a sign of the cross, a psalm half remembered, the Our Father spoken in a key just above whisper. When they reached, "Give us this day our daily bread," the boy's eyelashes trembled. After "Deliver us from evil," the house sighed, as if something that did not belong had stepped outside. "May I see the notes?" Father Gabriel asked gently. Claire brought the tin, hands shaking. He read a few slips, lips moving, eyes closed between lines as if to rinse them with mercy. He did not analyze or classify. He let the words do to him what they had done to the house. He blessed before he broke. He looked at the hunger as if it were loved. The baskets came back like boats from a bright sea. "These don't claim," the priest murmured. "They witness." He turned to Daniel. "How do these days meet your heart?" Daniel's jaw worked, then stilled. "I fix what tears," he said. "I measure what holds. This does not tear, and it cannot be measured. I'm not sure how to stand near it and be a father." Father Gabriel placed a hand on his shoulder, the gesture both priestly and brotherly. "Then stand near it and be a son," he said. "Let the Father be Father." That evening he invited them to the chapel after dark. No gathering, no talk, he promised. Just presence. They went when the streets were empty. The church smelled of wood and rain and all the years of whispered sorrow. The priest lit a single candle and placed the ciborium on the altar. Light crouched on gold. Shadows leaned in. Eli knelt, small spine straight, hands open like someone ready to receive instructions written in light. Claire knelt beside him, learning to breathe in a new way. Daniel remained standing at the back for a time, as if asking permission to come closer to a God he had avoided out of courtesy and fear. Then he came. Father Gabriel did not look at them. He looked at the host. His silence taught them how to look. He prayed with his posture, his slowness, the poverty of his hands. Minutes became mercy. No vision, no tremor, only the immensity of enough. Eli whispered, barely sound. "It's the same." The candle did not flicker. It deepened. Claire pressed her forehead to the pew. Daniel's breath shook free. The priest felt the familiar and the impossible become the same thing, the real. After, in the sacristy, Father Gabriel washed the small paten as if bathing a child. "We will not make of this a stage," he told the parents. "We will guard it like fire. We will let its warmth spread without waving it in the wind." Outside, a stray cat followed Eli to the door and curled around his ankle, purring with the stubborn joy of creatures who recognize shelter. The priest chuckled. "Even creation keeps liturgy," he said. Days folded. Father Gabriel visited often, sometimes speaking, often merely being. He brought psalms to teach Eli, not as assignments, but as places to sit. The boy loved the lines that taste like bread. You open your hand and satisfy the desire of every living thing. He repeated them until they felt like a second pulse. One afternoon, a curious deacon asked sharp questions, dates, proofs, deviations. The priest listened without offense and answered without defense. "If this is grace," he said, "it will bear the weight of waiting. If it is not, it will starve without attention. Either way, we will love the child." Eli remained guileless. He asked Father Gabriel if God ever got tired. Love rests inside itself, the priest replied, but it never stops. The boy nodded, as if that matched a memory he already kept. On a quiet evening, the priest and the boy walked the shoreline. "Do you ever feel lonely?" Father Gabriel asked. "Only when I forget I'm being looked at," Eli said. "When I remember his eyes, I'm home." The priest almost stumbled at the softness of that sentence. He understood then that his role was not to solve, but to steward, not to name, but to bow. And you, standing at the doorway of this story, the salt air on your tongue, what would you have done in the priest's sandals? Would you have catalogued, corrected, collected testimonies like shells? Or would you have set down your questions long enough to let the mystery breathe? Would you have courage to look into this child's eyes? Or would you turn away, afraid of what your own soul might confess if it were finally seen? Father Gabriel did not turn away. He kept his gaze steady, his heart unclenched, his steps slow. He became, in that season, the quiet cup into which God poured a little more stillness, so that a family could drink without drowning. The story was never told from pulpits. It moved instead through whispers, through the spaces between greetings at the market, through the fragile courage of people who had felt something but didn't know how to name it. They called it peace, or strangeness, or a quiet that stays with you. Whatever it was, it followed Eli like light finds water. He never preached. He never sought crowds. But hearts began to bend toward him the way plants bend toward sun. Mothers who couldn't sleep came to the gate at dusk just to see him playing with his worn-out ball. They went home lighter, though none could say why. A fisherman who had lost his brother at sea asked Eli to bless the nets before the next voyage. The boy only smiled and said, "May they come back full of what the sea wants to give." The next morning, the catch was small but perfect, just enough to feed every family that had helped mend the boats. Enough, that word again, the rhythm of the divine. Soon, people began leaving folded notes on the fence, names, illnesses, fears, thanks. Claire gathered them gently, never letting Eli see too many at once. She feared the weight of so much hope. But Eli already knew. He would wake in the night and whisper, "Someone is crying near the church. Let's pray until they stop." No one had told him. Yet when Father Gabriel visited the next day, he mentioned that a woman had spent the night in prayer outside the chapel after losing her job and had gone home at dawn feeling seen. The mystery no longer lived inside the house alone. It had begun to hum through the town like a song too low for words. Shopkeepers noticed fewer quarrels. Fishermen shared bait without counting. Children stopped fighting over marbles and played until dusk without shouting. Something unseen had tuned the air. Daniel watched with cautious awe. "What if this is how God works?" he said once to Claire. "Not by striking miracles, but by teaching everything to breathe in rhythm again?" She nodded, but tears trembled at her jaw. Because peace is heavy when you know it may not stay. At the Sunday service, the pews filled earlier than usual. Father Gabriel kept the liturgy simple. No mention of the boy, no deviation from the gospel. Yet when Eli joined his hands in prayer, the echo was tangible. The singing softened. Even the old wooden beam seemed to listen. After communion, the priest remained kneeling longer, his silence louder than homilies. Later, people said they had felt something like warmth but deeper, though no one dared call it miracle. The bakery near the docks began giving away loaves every Friday evening. "It feels wrong to charge for bread lately," the owner said with a shy smile. "I don't know why." Daniel helped deliver them. He said it reminded him of fixing nets, work that holds what others need. Every gesture became liturgy. Still, not everyone understood. A few mocked. "You all speak as if the boy glows in the dark," one man scoffed at the tavern. Another replied, "Maybe he does. Maybe that's the point. You only see it when the lights go out." Laughter followed, but uneasy. That same night, an argument erupted between two fishermen over debt. Eli, passing with Claire, stopped and looked at them, not with fear, not even with reproach, but with that calm that bends storms. One man's voice cracked mid-curse, the other dropped his fists. They stood blinking, as though forgetting why they had been angry. Later, they both went to church together. Father Gabriel found them kneeling side by side. "We can't explain it," they said. "We just felt full." Peace, it seemed, was contagious. Children were the first to speak openly. "It makes the air feel soft," a little girl told her mother, "like Sunday." And indeed, Sundays began to feel longer, stretched by grace. Eli, though, grew quieter. He smiled when people thanked him, but always answered, "It isn't mine to give." Once, a woman kissed his forehead and called him an angel. He shook his head. "Angels don't get tired," he said simply. "I do." Claire's heart broke a little at that. She realized holiness costs something, even when carried by a child. She began to fear for his small shoulders, his fragile chest. Some nights, she woke to find him sitting upright, breathing heavily, palms glowing faintly in the reflection of the streetlight. It's just the remembering, he whispered. Sometimes it burns. Father Gabriel visited more often, always calm, always grounding. Even fire needs to rest, he said. He brought psalms, blessed the house, and told the family to live normally, to eat, to laugh, to keep the rhythm of ordinary love. Holiness, he reminded them, is not a performance, but a pulse. One afternoon, a group from the neighboring village came. A child among them had been bedridden for months. They didn't ask for miracles, only for prayer. Eli sat by her, held her small hand, and whispered words no one caught. When she smiled for the first time in weeks, the room erupted in tears. No light, no spectacle, just life returning to a face. Father Gabriel later said, "If you call that healing, then love heals everything." The mayor tried to keep order, worried about religious excitement, but even he confessed privately to the priest that something had changed in him. "I don't shout as much," he admitted. "It's as if the boy made silence contagious." And so the quiet spread, not as rumor, but as relief. The community began to move slower, speak softer, forgive faster. Bread tasted better, laughter lasted longer. Some said it felt like living inside a prayer. If you had walked those streets then, you would have felt it too, that sacred ache between heartbeat and breath. You might have stopped, sensing a peace you didn't earn, a forgiveness that didn't ask your permission. Has your heart ever recognized something before your mind could explain it? Maybe that's how heaven travels, through the pulse of what feels right before it is proven. The town learned to listen, and the boy kept remembering, though his eyes grew heavier with each retelling. Grace had touched the soil, and the soil was answering. They decided on a vigil, not because anyone announced it, but because the town seemed to arrive at the same longing at the same time. Father Gabriel simply left the chapel unlocked, and word moved like tide. Dusk lowered its blue veil. Lamps bloomed along the road, and people came, quietly, awkwardly, carrying thermoses, shawls, and the kind of hunger that has nothing to do with the stomach. Daniel walked with a covered basket under his arm. Claire held the small wooden cross the old stranger had left. Eli, pale from so many days of being remembered by heaven, moved between them like the thinnest wick still holding flame. At the chapel door, he paused. "We will not be loud," he whispered, as if teaching the night how to behave. He likes it when hearts speak softer than mouths. Inside, the single candle on the altar gave enough light for faces to become halos of shadow. Father Gabriel knelt first. The psalms rose and fell, unhurried. Between them, silence pooled like deep water. For an hour, nothing happened, except the one thing that always happens when time finally surrenders. The room began to breathe with a different lung. You could hear it in the way people shifted, in the way long-held griefs loosened their grip, in the way even children forgot to fidget. When the psalms finished, the priest spoke a single sentence. "Let us keep watch." Then he did not speak again. Eli's head tilted as though a name were being spoken from behind the veil of air. Claire set the cross on the front pew. Daniel opened the basket and revealed several small loaves Claire had baked that afternoon, more out of reflex than plan. He placed them near the altar rail, uncertain, almost embarrassed by the ordinariness of flour and salt. Minutes stretched. Rain began outside, not wild, not timid, just a steady washing of roofs and streets and memory. The door groaned. Latecomers slipped in and lined the back wall. Someone coughed. Someone sighed. Someone began to cry without sound. Father Gabriel's non-speaking gathered them like a net. Eli stood. No one told him to. He walked to the kneeler and touched one of the loaves as if greeting an old friend. His fingers rested on the crust, and his shoulders relaxed. For the first time that week, he looked like he was not carrying anything at all, only being carried. Claire felt the hair on her arms rise. Daniel swallowed hard and could not find where his breath had gone. The boy turned, not to the congregation, but to a space just above them, like one looks toward weather moving in from the sea. His voice, when it came, was not loud. It didn't need to be. It bound the room the way thread binds a wound. "He is here." Nothing shook. No light burst. Only the outline of the ordinary grew unbearable with meaning, as if every pew, every nail, every eyelash had been waiting its whole life to hear those words spoken without pretending. Eli lifted one loaf and held it with two hands, the way you hold something that has held you first. He did not mimic liturgy. He remembered love. He looked at Father Gabriel. The priest bowed his head, consenting to what the Spirit knows how to arrange without permission. "Do you remember," Eli asked the room, "that he told them to sit down?" He smiled almost playfully. He liked people seated, not scrambling. He set the loaf back, then traced the rim of the basket, a child drawing a circle around a sunlight patch on the floor. "He thanked," the boy said, "and the air changed shape." Claire wept. Daniel reached for her hand. The priest was still, like a tree listening to sap. Then the sentence came, the one that would make the town forever think of bread the way you think of your own name. "Gather the fragments so that nothing is lost." He didn't explain. He didn't need to. It was scripture in a child's mouth, memory braided with command. Father Gabriel nodded once, tiny bow to the voice within the voice. A woman stepped forward with shaking hands, took a loaf, and broke it. The sound, small, crisp, was the loudest thing in the universe. She passed half to a neighbor she had not spoken to in months. He broke it again and gave it to the man who owed him money. The man broke and shared with the widow behind him. The widow, hands like twigs and courage like a lion, broke and gave to a child. The child giggled through tears, as children do when the world is both too much and exactly enough. There was no counting. No one said miracle. Yet the basket emptied slower than logic. People ate as if hunger had manners, as if it were being led gently out of the room. Those who had brought food they'd meant to keep for later found themselves opening their bags, their hands, their stories. Apologies traveled on crumbs. So did vows. When the basket came back to Eli, pieces remained small, honest, undeniable. He touched each one and placed them softly into a linen cloth. "Fragments," he whispered, smiling like someone who had found seashells along a shore he knew by heart. "Nothing lost." The rain thickened, then softened, then remembered how to be blessing. In the back, a quarrelsome pair stood silently holding the same crust, unsure how to argue with their mouths full of what felt like forgiveness. Near the front, a girl who had not spoken since her father left whispered to her mother, "It tastes warm." The mother collapsed into a hug that steadied both of them. A man with a sea inside his bones closed his eyes and saw his brother, not drowning now, but walking toward him on a calm floor of light. Father Gabriel rose and spoke the simplest homily of his life. He wastes nothing, not hunger, not sorrow, not time. He gestured toward the boy only with a glance, less to honor Eli than to protect him. Eli sat down again, spent but radiant the way a candle is both smaller and more itself after burning. He leaned against Claire. She pressed her cheek to his hair, and in that pressure was every blessing she had ever wanted to utter. Daniel covered them with his arm and discovered that protection can feel like surrender without defeat. Outside, the storm ended as quietly as it had begun. The door creaked open. A breeze entered that smelled like stone washed clean. People left in pairs and threes, speaking softly, carrying their faces like newly baptized things. No one talked about multiplication. They talked about enough. They talked about how, for once, there had been no fear of not having. They talked about how the silence had said something to each of them in a voice they recognized but could not imitate later. And you, if you had been there, with a piece of warm crust on your tongue and a memory you could not place pressing behind your eyes, what would you have heard? In the silence of the sacred, would you listen? Or would fear speak louder? The last to leave were the four at the front. Father Gabriel gathered the cloth with the remaining pieces, kissed the wooden cross, and placed both on the altar as if returning tools to a craftsman. Eli traced the sign of the cross over the basket, then touched the rail, then touched the air, like a child learning a new instrument with an old melody. "Thank you," he whispered, and the chapel seemed to breathe the words back. They walked home without speaking. The town, newly quiet, sounded like a page not yet written but already holy. Morning broke without ceremony. No new light, no trumpet of sky, only the slow return of colors to their honest selves. The bread was gone, the basket washed, the chapel empty but not abandoned. The town moved gently, like a body that had learned to breathe after long weeping. Eli awoke later than usual. The fever of remembering had cooled. He no longer spoke of the bread, nor of the hands that broke it. He asked for porridge, smiled at the taste, and looked at his parents as though he had just returned from somewhere too far to describe. Claire exhaled a sob of relief disguised as laughter. Daniel ruffled his son's hair and whispered, "Welcome back," though deep inside he knew the boy had never been gone, only nearer to where they could not yet follow. Days resumed their small chores. Laundry flapped, fishermen shouted names across the docks. The bakery smelled like mercy. Father Gabriel still visited, but less to question and more to sit. He and Daniel sometimes mended nets together in silence. The priest said once, "Every net is a parable if you look long enough." Daniel nodded. He had stopped arguing with wonder. Eli played outside, slower now, gentler, as if he feared stepping on a heartbeat beneath the soil. The neighborhood children joined him again, finding him ordinary enough to chase with laughter. He never mentioned miracles. Only once, while sharing a snack, he said, "Don't eat too fast. The bread listens." The children giggled, not understanding, but they slowed anyway. Claire's tin by the stove remained full of notes. She reread them sometimes at night, candle trembling beside her. The sentences still pulsed. He never hurried. The air changed shape. Nothing is lost. She no longer tried to analyze them. They had already done their work. They had already turned her fear into reverence. She found herself whispering grace before even the smallest acts. Folding clothes, pouring water, tying shoelaces. Everything felt like a liturgy that had forgotten it was holy. Weeks became months. The town stayed different. Fights ended quicker. Doors stayed unlocked. Even gossip began to sound more like prayer. People called it the season of quiet. No one claimed to start it. No one wanted to end it. Eli grew taller. The brightness in his eyes did not fade, but it settled, becoming the kind of light that stays instead of shining. He spoke less of visions, more of small things. Mom, listen to how the kettle sings. Or Dad, the sea says thank you when you fix the nets. It was as though the sacred had traded its thunder for tenderness. One evening, he asked Father Gabriel to walk with him to the shore. They sat on a piece of driftwood, watching the tide swallow the sun. Do you still remember? The priest asked. I don't need to, Eli said. He remembers enough for both of us. They stayed there until stars appeared, simple, steady lanterns, on a sky that no longer frightened them. Later that night, while Claire closed windows against the wind, Eli stopped at the table where everything had begun. He touched the grain of the wood, ran his fingers over faint scratches, and smiled. It's still here, he murmured. Daniel looked up from his chair. What is? The sound, the boy said. When he broke it, the table kept it. Daniel pressed his palm flat against the surface. At first, he felt nothing. Then, barely, something like a pulse, not beneath the wood, but between the beats of his own heart. He lifted his hand quickly as if touching a secret. Claire watched them both, and the three shared a silence that didn't end when the moment did. The next Sunday, the family sat in their usual pew. Father Gabriel's homily was brief. He spoke of ordinary holiness, of bread that refuses to stop feeding, of love that multiplies even in memory. He did not mention Eli's name, yet every face turned slightly toward the boy when he said, Sometimes grace hides in small kitchens and teaches the world to kneel again. After the service, people lingered outside, reluctant to disperse. Someone began humming the old hymn about daily bread, and others joined softly until the air itself seemed to sway. Eli laughed, a sound so light it might have been mistaken for wind in wheat fields. The seasons turned, years too. Eli's memories faded into the rhythm of ordinary life. But the town never forgot. They told stories of the night the bread refused to end, of the peace that stayed behind like scent on a sleeve. Not everyone believed, but no one mocked. Faith had taken on a quieter shape, something you live instead of explain. Claire aged with serenity. Daniel found joy in work again. Father Gabriel retired, leaving his chalice to the next priest with the instruction, Handle gently, it's been near fire. Every new loaf baked in that town carried a rumor of blessing. People said it tasted slightly sweeter when shared. Sometimes visitors would ask about the boy who remembered. Locals smiled and pointed to the sea. He lives inland now, they'd say, but the tide still tells his story. Oh, and at dusk, if you listened closely, you could still hear it, the hum of a miracle that chose to stay ordinary, the faint echo of hands breaking bread, the quiet conviction that nothing given in love is ever lost. How many things does God whisper to the world, and how many do we truly hear? Maybe the whispers are not in thunder, but in heartbeat, not in heaven split open, but in the hush between two breaths. Listen long enough, and you may notice it too, that soft remembrance beneath all things, the secret that every table, every loaf, every dawn is trying to repeat. He broke, and it fed the world. The silence that followed was not emptiness. It was peace learning to speak. And eternity listened.